Well, in case you don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Chu. We're going to talk about such a favorite topic, biostatistics. Okay? Well, first of all, the question is, why even learn about this? You know? If you think about it, we human beings as a species, very interesting. We are very successful in many ways, but one of the ways we're very successful is that we recognize pattern. If you think about what you do every day, you recognize pattern. Okay? We also an interesting species because we like to make predictions. We like to understand the world that we're in. And at the end of the day, if you look at all the mathematical models, all the fancy math that you learn, all it is a set of tools to help you predict a set of circumstances. Okay? Again, if you think about it, long ago, when man began to evolve, we saw hoof prints on the sand, but we don't see an animal. A lion, a tiger would ignore it. There's no animal available. But what does man do? He says, aha, I see this pattern. I know that if I follow the hoof prints far enough, it will eventually lead me to that animal. He predicted because he saw a pattern. What does this have anything to do with biostatistics? Because biostatistics is a set of mathematical models that help you predict what's going on in the clinical setting. And if you use statistics in other arena, it helps you predict what's going on in other arenas. Okay? Once you understand that big global view, the purpose, then you can start looking about what is a p-value, what is confidence interval, what is the bell curve. All those are basically just addition, subtraction, multiplication, logarithm, right? They're just mechanical functions to help you achieve your ultimate goal, which is to predict. Does that make sense? All right. Let's go back to the old days when you learn calculus or pre-calculus. You learn what's the simplest model, the mathematical model. Y equals mx plus b, right? Remember that? What does that mean? Direct relationship. Direct relationship. If you were to map that out, what would it be? It's a line, right? Because we know that many things in life behave like a line. Okay? If I have a independent variable, x, okay, number of hours study, okay, or, I'm sorry, if I have number of hours study, and then I have a outcome, which is a y, how well I do on the test. You can pretty much set it out. You map it out into a line, right? The more hours you study, the more dedicated you are, the more likely you're going to get a high score. Similarly, if you want to run a marathon, and you want to have a lower, you want to run a faster race, the number of hours you spend running, the number of hours you get up early in the morning, and dedicate it, is going to correlate to the faster time you run, right? Predictable, right? Right? That's a line. That's a simple line. Y equals mx plus b. You also learn that there's some behavior that looks like a parabola. There's some behavior that's logarithmic. If I have a Petri dish of 100 bacteria, in an hour, it would not grow to 200. In 2 hours, it would not grow to 300, because that's a linear relationship, right? We know that in an hour, 100 colonies of bacteria will become 10,000. The second hour becomes 1 million. The third hour, 10 million. That's a logarithmic growth. Agree? Make sense so far? Because we learned this is the behavior of our natural order, of our natural world. We develop mathematical models to explain the observation. Observation. Once we have that mathematical model, we learn to predict what will happen. From that, we develop ways to address if we have a problem. We learn if bacteria, if a patient is septic, the natural growth of order of exponential growth will be X amount. We learn if you get a bacteria, certain time, certain frequency, certain number of intervals, you will be able to kill the bacteria. Because we learn of its growth. We develop models. We predicted its behavior. We intervene. Does that make sense? That's the purpose of statistics, to understand, to read it. It's not just to go out there and say the p-value is this is, confidence interval is this is, well, it's statistically significant, it's not statistically significant. No. I mean, that's all good, but you've got to understand why we have this. You've got to understand why we say what we do. We've got to be able to say what we observe is just random. Or is there a pattern that we can predict? And if there's a pattern that can be predicted, that is very consistent to explain what we observe, then can we use that model to intervene? Does that make sense? So, whenever you design a study, you know, one of my favorite things that I like to do during M&M is I like to listen, and I always ask the question. I always, you know what, people think that maybe Dr. Chu is so harsh and all that. It's not that. I enjoy questioning the paradigm. Questioning, what are we doing? Is that correct or not? Questioning, is that a correct assumption that we're making? Then I go back in the literature, look at it, and say, you know what, no one has really addressed this. And if they did, it has not been addressed to my satisfaction. Okay? And this is why we move forward. This is why we make progress, because we constantly ask questions. We constantly challenge the paradigm that we're learning. One of you guys are doing a study with me, and I'm not a traumatologist. I don't, you know, I no longer do trauma. I mean, I get called once in a while if they need help. And, you know, I go out there and, of course, you know, I put on a show like I know what I'm doing. But the reality is I'm not a traumatologist. I do the best I can, okay? But I observed that, you know, I had an experience, and I thought it was maybe just an isolated experience. But then I start seeing my colleagues having it, and I'm like, wait a minute now. There's a pattern here. I wonder if we can look at the study, come up with some kind of understanding of the disease process. And what am I talking about? A patient with cirrhosis who underwent emergency laparotomy. I found that no matter what I do, all of the things that I was taught, all the experience that I've gained over the decades, could not save this patient's life. So I wonder, you know what? If I have a cirrhotic and the patient's bleeding intraoperatively, should I continue to resuscitate? Is it a futile? Or can we look at that and I can predict this patient will not be salvageable? If I had a patient and I said to you, 80-year-old guy came in with abdominal pain, looked like ischemic bowel. I went in there and I opened the patient. Everything is blue. I'm black and blue. Do I continue to operate? What do you do? Why did you close? Why not continue to further resuscitate? Futile care. How do you know? What else? Pattern. You recognize the pattern. You recognize the pattern not only from yourself, your experience, but your colleagues and others. Dead bowel, elderly patients, severely ill, the whole entire bowel is dark. You open, you close, you have a nice conversation, sensitive conversation with the family, and that's it. You don't start doing, give me a vascular stapler, let's do this, and anastomosis, do. You know that is futile. Same thing here. The question that I'm asking, and one of the residents is going to ask, along with Dr. Samra, who's a traumatologist, is going to help me with, is if you have a cirrhotic and you have abdominal bleeding, emergency trauma, what is the likelihood of salvaging that patient? Okay? Observation. Understanding what's the purpose of the study. Am I using the right data? Does it make sense to me to go to the breast cancer database to answer that question? Absolutely not. I have to think about it in my mind, well, how should I conduct the study? Not only that, do I have enough patients to study? Why study a rare disease that occurs once every 20 years? You're not going to be able to accrue a number of studies to recognize a pattern, to develop a model, to further understand the disease process. Does that make sense? You're also going to ask the question, are you making a fair comparison? Are you comparing apples and apples or apples and oranges? Okay? Does it make sense to apply experience from the Vietnam trauma to the civilian gunshot wound? During the Vietnam War, it's high velocity. Civilian, they tend to be low velocity. Is that a fair comparison to apply the experience from one to another? What is the outcome of interest? Why do a study I'm looking at the cosmesis of this and this and this and this, and then I could get away and do this kind of really beautiful cosmesis, when the outcome of interest of the patient is, will I survive? You do all this operation on me, will I survive? Well, we really didn't look at that. We just look at the cosmetic outcome. That's not the outcome of interest for the patient. What is the study design? Was the analysis performed correctly? If I had a piece of wood and a nail, what do you think I need next? A hammer. But if I got a drill, what are you going to do? You're going to it ain't going to make it. You don't know what you're doing. We laugh, right? But you'd be surprised when I reviewed these papers to be published, they're doing exactly that. They're using statistical models, statistical tools that are not applicable to what they're doing. I read where they use chi-square to look at continuous data. Well, that's the wrong test to use, right? Same thing here, using a drill to try to nail a hammer. So are we doing the analysis correctly? And how relevant is the information you have in clinical practice? In general, you can group the question you have, the study you have, into hypothesis generating and hypothesis testing. Hypothesis generating is basically saying, you know what, I just have a thought. I wonder, but I don't have a lot of data. I have an hypothesis, but let me see if I can, look at the set of data, look at the information, and I wonder if I can generate some question that no one has looked at, or if they did, has not been addressed to my satisfaction. That's hypothesis generating. You're generating hypothesis. Okay? Many of the papers that I've written, they're hypothesis generating. I always couch at the end of the paper. We are not sure about this. This is just beginning. This is just an observation on our part. I think that we would need more data to look into this to address whether this is a true observation that we're seeing. The other one is hypothesis testing. You have an established hypothesis. You're testing whether that hypothesis is true or not. You're challenging it, or you have another set of questions that are very similar to that what's already have, and then you're asking, is it something else that we're missing? Okay. So this is a pretty nice chart in the chapter. I mean, I read the chapter. I like it. You guys read it. Look, my job is not up here to recite everything that is in the chapter. My job is to hit the highlights, but also to provide you my insights. Otherwise, I could get somebody and say, here's a chapter, read it, outline it, present it, and then within 45 minutes, we're done. Job is done. Okay? Cross off of things that I need to do. Okay? So, point is, read the chapter. It's very nice. It's very good. But a lot of things I'm going to talk about may not touch the chapter. Okay? But this is the one that's really nice. Okay? So I recommend that you go over and look at it. So when we look at data come in all shapes and sizes and forms, okay? Just like human beings, all shapes, sizes, and forms, okay? Many of you will deal with medical records. Okay, you go into medical records, you look at the data, you record the set of data that you want to look at. Patient report outcomes, administrative database. You will see people publish from administrative database. There are positive and minus to it. Administrative database is like a Medicare database. It doesn't give you, it's not meant to be for clinical use. It's meant for the federal government to track down whether you're complying with what you're doing and what else. Billing, right? It's all about the billing. It's like, well, did you code that correctly? Did you, did you upcode that, or did you downcode that? Okay. So, administrative database may not be as reliable. It's very good because why? Because it has a lot of data. Okay. Why is it important to have a lot of data in general if you're going to study something? What does that mean? Increase the power. You're right. That's statistics speaking. Huh? Right, but because why? Because the idea is that if you have a population, let's say you have a population of 100,000 people, right? There's no way you're going to study 100,000 people and record everything. If we do that, we'll never come to any amount of significant data, okay? If we did that, we'll probably end up maybe knowing 3 or 4 answers, okay? But so what you do is that you need a large population, and you take a slice of that population, and you believe that is representative of the bigger population, okay? So when Chad says the power means N, there's a statistical test to calculate how many patients you need in order to avoid what? Randomness. In order to say what you observe is just random. Okay? Noise. It's not significant. Okay? Like I said, you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. Always keep in mind there are biases, there are confounders. Okay? What are confounders, medical students? Have you heard of that term? Be honest. Raise your hand if you don't know what it means. Raise your hand. Good. He's an honest person. Raise your hand. I don't know about you guys, but I'll tell you, I didn't understand what the hell that really means. I didn't have a deep understanding of it until I was a third-year surgical resident. So I'll tell you what, you guys are pretty smart then. Pretty smart. Confounders are basically, they're very similar to bias. They're things that skew your data. Okay? They bias your data one way or another. Chad, give me an example of confounders. Of anything, of any study. I'll give you an example, okay? Suppose I get a group of highly accomplished individuals, okay? And I said, I have a course. It's a leadership course. I'm only going to select the very best. So I look at everybody's CV. You know, Chad is the president of his club. Awe is created an organization of his own to help the needy. So everybody has some leadership background. Okay, all right. Brooks here backs grocery. Nothing wrong with that. Okay. But I'm not looking at a person who has experience in bagging groceries. I'm looking at people who have what? Leadership skills. Because why? Because I have a course called Leadership Development. Right? Do you think I'm going to put Brooks in my class? You know, on his essay, I back groceries. I go and I help little ladies who couldn't make it to their car. And, you know, when it's hot, I carry a fan and I fan them to make sure they're okay, and I give them a bottle of water. Right? You know, our way is like, you know, I create an organization. I led that. In 3 years, I formed my 501c3 organization. We raised $3,000 initially, and it's exponential growth. Now, into the third year, we raised $30,000, and we're expected to grow double that. If I were to read 2 applications, which one do I likely to select in my class of leadership? Our way, right? So then I do the leadership, and I send him to the leadership. You know, come on over here, I'll teach you this. You know, leadership be this. You know, this paradigm of leadership. Blah, blah, blah. After 2 weeks, you know, of intense leadership skills, and I say, we're going to follow you guys. Okay? So we follow them, and a year later, our way makes it into CNN Heroes. You know, he turned his neighborhood into a great place. You know, Chad made it into CNN Heroes, highlighted. And what do I say about my program? Good job, man. Leadership program works. But there's a confounder. What is that confounder? I'm asking that man who raised his hand because he's honest about it.
What the confounder is?
Yeah.
Confounder is something that's like altering.
But no, in that study, what is the confounder? Tell me what's wrong with that study. Confounder is basically saying, tell me what is wrong with that study.
Well, you're basing leadership on something that could be. Your study's based on whether or not you think that good leader is just because he's president of his club, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the reason why he's.
What is my outcome?
I was looking for a leadership.
My outcome is what?
You're only selecting applicants with already.
Right. And so therefore, I'm saying to myself, my leadership course is excellent. Please come and pay $3,000 for a 2-week course because we create excellent leaders. Here's our way. He was a little baby, didn't know what he's doing. Now he's CNN Heroes. Right? I couch like that. Are we done? Okay? Usually when it turns off, that means you're done.
That's because of cost cutting.
Oh, cost-cutting measure, okay? But you see, it's a bias, it's confounders. I'm only selecting those who I know will be successful regardless of whether they enroll in my class or not. So my success as a class of developing leaders has nothing to do with the class per se. It has everything to do with how I select people to enroll. Right? Now, had I randomly enrolled Brooks, I randomly enrolled, Jennifer, who, I'll give her a story, she goes home and she goes to the library every weekend just to help kids who underperform in, in a class of statistics, biostatistics, okay? She really gets it. She loves it. She understood the stuff. And she knows that her colleagues are struggling. She goes in there. No big deal, but that's leadership skills, right? I would love to get her, okay? Or, who else? Okay. She's like, don't make me, please. Okay, please don't make me. Okay. So B here, she's like, got in trouble into the law, went to Walmart and saw jewelry she really liked, didn't have the money, but, she was a teenager at that time, okay. So I would pick her, right? That's random sample. Then I follow them. Then if B becomes this, U.S. senator down the road, right? Jennifer becomes the president of an organization or the U.S. Now I can say something about my leadership class, right? So that's the point. You got to be very careful when you select a group and you study that you address these confounders. Now, you will never address all confounders. You will never. Because why? Because we as human beings are not one-dimensional. We're multidimensional. Okay? So you will never be able to address all the confounders. But you try your very best. And when you read the studies, you have to identify what are the biases, what are the confounders. Okay? So that's why many of you guys, and I know you don't have time, you just read the abstract and you read the conclusion, and then you come and you present the data, and you say, well, this study does this and this. Okay? And then you run into somebody like me that I read the study too. I'm like, well, actually, be very careful. Right? The favorite study that I know you guys quote, is the Stitch trial, right? The Stitch trial, 1 centimeter, 1 term. I'm like, yeah, but look at it. The study has bias. BMIs of 25. Right? It's biased. We got patients that I call Shreveport 3, 4, 5. They're huge. 1 centimeter bite ain't going to make it. Right? Type of trials. You're going to have different level 1, 2, and 3 you're going to hear about. We talked about randomization, the randomness. Mathematically, if you have a population that you randomly select out, and you calculate the number of people that the power calculation, the answer, it should address a lot of the confounders. Okay? Don't ask me why. It works. There's a computer program where it shows you how it works. You just randomly pick a number, and you randomly push this button, and it will divide the two groups. And the two groups will pretty much be equal in almost every dimension that you want to measure. And that's the power of a randomization process. That's why when you read a study, this is a randomized trial. Double-blinded. In other words, I don't know what's going on as the investigator, and the patients have no idea what I'm giving them. It's blinded. It addresses biases and confounders. Make sense so far? Right? So that's the best. That's one of the best trials that we have. The second is also very good, and it depends on who you read. Some people believe that meta-analysis supersedes the randomized control trials. Meta-analysis is basically taking all the major trials, the studies, get all their data, and then you analyze it into one big file. In fact, it depends on how you read it and how they do it. Some people will be so anal compulsive that they request the data from all the studies, the original data, and they compile it together to come up with an answer. Other people just look at the results of each of the study and analyze it. So you got to be careful of what you read. Even meta-analysis have its hierarchy of the study quality. Then you're looking at observational study. Observational studies tend to be retrospective. You're looking back. You're not following the patient. You guys understand the difference between retrospective and prospective, right? If you don't, please raise your hand. Don't be shy. Okay? Good. We're going to talk about cohort study, case control study, cross-sectional study, case reports, and case series. Many of you guys will do this part right here, case reports and case series. Maybe case control, cross-sectional. The majority of you will not do the cohort study. For academic faculty, what do I advise them to do if you want to make it into the world of academics? Ideally, but very few of us have the resources, the energy to do it. This is what I recommend. Yes, it's important to have these, case report, case series, but to move up the academic ranks, you've got to have cohort study. We'll talk about it. Cohort studies can be prospective or retrospective in nature. If you guys were in my clinic, you see that we have a prospective breast cancer database. We have Ashley who sits there who enters the data in a prospective manner. They're not randomized, okay? And then with this prospective database, if we want to ask a question, we go back and look at it. So it's a retrospective. So many of our studies are what? Retrospective of a prospectively collected database, right? We go back retrospectively to analyze a database that was created prospectively. The advantage is that you have immediate access to the data and you get the results. The disadvantage is retrospective in nature. See here. Okay? I sent you a paper. This is a cohort study. I asked a question. You know, N2, N3 disease, people automatically get a PET scan and metastatic workup. And I said, you know what? I wonder if that's really true, if that is wise use of utilization. So we went back, and we got a cohort of almost over 250 patients with this disease. And we want to know how many of these actually develop or present or will develop stage 4 disease. So in other words, they're high risk of developing stage 4, but how many of them actually do? And we found that, not all of them develop stage 4. You guys read the study, right? That's a cohort study. I have a cohort of patients that I follow, that I look at. Case control. You start off with a cohort of patients with an outcome of interest. You match it, okay? Patients without it. Okay? Then you compare the two groups to understand the risk factors you're looking at. For example, is obesity, that's a risk factor, related to the development of gallbladder cancer? We ask this every day, right? Is this related to this? Is, cirrhotic patients who had trauma, bleeding, will they make it? Will they survive? Okay? So what you do is you identify all the gallbladder cancer in a given population. That's your case. Then you select another population without gallbladder cancer. Okay? That's your control. Then you compare the incidence of obesity between the two. Make sense? Okay? That's the case control. The outcome of interest is already known. That's your case, or the experimental group. You compare with a group that does not have that outcome of interest. Then you look at the factors that you are interested in. Any question? Case control. Cross-sectional study. You don't follow individuals over time. What you do is you take a snapshot picture of your population. And you classify the individuals as having or not having that health outcome. Here's an example. Well, let's see here. So basically, if you look at the cohort, your study group is the population at risk. Okay? The cross-section is you take an entire population. And for the cross-sectional, you're looking at prevalence. You're looking at the whole entire population. You say, what's the incidence of obesity in this whole entire population? Okay? And then of those who are obese, what's the incidence of gallbladder cancer? You're taking a slice at one moment in time. I give you an example of a paper, cross-sectional study, right? The authors looked at 101 general surgery residency programs across the U.S. A snapshot picture. Boom. U.S. programs. What are they looking at? How many people underreported their duty hours? Right? They didn't follow the patient longitudinally. They didn't do any of that. It's just, here's a snapshot picture of this population I'm looking at, and boom, what am I looking for? Case reports and case series. Case report is single report. There's no comparison. I'm just observing. I'm just using descriptive statistics to describe what I'm observing. Case series is just more than a case. Okay? For the sake of time, we're going to end there. But again, the measurements that look at the slides that I show you, the measurements are basically, like I said, they're tools to make sure that you measure things adequately. 2 minutes really quick. If you look at measurements, if you look at the tools we have, you can basically divide them into two major categories. Continuous. When you have continuous data, they're data that have a number. Age, blood pressure, right? They're quantity, they're quantifiable. I can compare age, I can compare blood pressure, right? I can compare height, I can compare long distances, okay? The other type is categorical. They're category, they're discrete, okay? Marital status, eye color, right? I can't say what is the mean marital status. Makes no sense, right? If you start measuring the mean marital status, I just cross that paper and say reject. Get a biostatistics to do the analysis, right? Among categorical, you have ordinal data that even though they don't have a number, but they have an order to them. They're categorical data, but they have an order. Give me your pain severity scale. Is it moderate, mild, or severe? All right? Educational level. High school educational level, college education, graduate, postgraduate. They have an order. Right? So those are the types of data that you're dealing with. That's it. If you can keep that in mind, if you have a clear number, that's continuous. You're not going to start using chi-square for continuous data, right? What you're going to do is you're going to use the mean, okay? And if central limit theorem basically says that if you have, it works out, if you have 30 or more patients or 30 more population, okay, you can use the mean, and the mean is very accurate. It will not skew to the left or to the right. But if you have less than that, then you're going to have to use the median for your study, okay? I look for that when I review articles also, because if they have, we have a sample of 20 and the mean is this, I'm like, please report median. Mean is useless because it can skew to the left or to the right. Any questions? Clear as mud? Okay, thank you.